Welcome to another deep dive, and today we're going to be looking at pornography addiction.
Yeah.
Specifically, how it impacts people, relationships, society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And, you provide some fascinating sources for this.
Okay.
And what I thought was really interesting about this is he's speaking from a cultural context we might not often hear from.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really valuable to kind of get those different perspectives and understand how this issue kind of plays out, in different parts of the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that he really emphasizes is how significant early exposure to pornography is.
Yeah.
He says that, encountering it at a young age
Yeah.
can dramatically increase the risk of addiction later in life.
Yeah, that makes sense when you think about, how our brains develop, right? I mean, in those really formative years, we're just incredibly sensitive to new stimuli, especially things that, kind of trigger our reward system.
Right.
So those neural pathways, linked to pornography consumption, they get etched in pretty deeply.
And he shared a statistic that kind of made me stop in my tracks.
Yeah.
He said that the average age of first exposure among the people he studied was 11 years old.
Wow.
11.
That's young.
Yes, practically still a child.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that this is not just an adult issue.
Right.
And it also underscores, the urgency of preventative measures.
Right.
Like talking to kids about healthy sexuality in age-appropriate ways. Because if those neural pathways are getting laid down that early,
right,
we need to be intervening much sooner.
And this leads into, another interesting point he makes about the role that family dynamics play.
Yeah.
And, he suggests that both overly strict and neglectful parenting styles can actually contribute to children seeking solace in pornography.
Yeah, and it's fascinating that both extremes can lead to the same outcome,
Oh,
albeit for different reasons, right?
Mhm.
I mean, in overly strict households, there's often a lot of shame and secrecy around sex.
Yeah.
So kids might turn to pornography out of curiosity or a desire to rebel.
Yeah.
On the flip side, kids from neglectful homes, might gravitate towards it seeking a sense of connection or validation that they're not getting elsewhere.
Right.
So it really highlights that importance of open and honest communication about sexuality within families.
Right.
If those conversations aren't happening, it's no surprise that kids will seek information and connection in less healthy ways.
Yeah, I think it speaks to the need to foster an environment where kids feel safe,
Absolutely.
asking questions, exploring their feelings without judgment.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, kind of shifting gears a bit, he also talks about the impact of societal acceptance on how we perceive pornography. And he argues that its increasing normalization in media and entertainment is actually downplaying the potential harms.
Right. It's almost as if we become desensitized to it, right? The
Right.
more we see it, the less shocking or taboo it seems, and the easier it is to just dismiss any negative consequences.
Yeah, and he used this analogy that I thought was really fascinating.
Yeah.
He compared it to, the way jeans were once considered scandalous,
Yeah.
but are now completely commonplace.
Right.
And it made me think about how our collective perception of what is acceptable, can shift dramatically over time,
Totally.
especially with the influence of media and pop culture.
It's a brilliant point, yeah. And, jeans themselves aren't harmful, but his
No.
analogy really shows how a behavior can go from being fringe to mainstream,
Right.
even if there are potential downsides that we're not fully acknowledging.
Exactly. And so let's talk about those potential downsides.
Yeah.
He argues that pornography can have a significantly detrimental effect on relationships. He says it can distort our perceptions of love, intimacy, and respect,
Yeah.
often leading to unrealistic expectations and comparisons in real-life relationships.
Yeah, the issue is that pornography often presents a very narrow and idealized view of sex and relationships, right?
Yeah.
It's completely devoid of the complexities and nuances of real life.
Right.
It's all about, performance and achieving pleasure, not about genuine connection or emotional intimacy.
Right. And he even points to some pretty startling statistics about the link between pornography use and divorce rates,
Oh, wow.
suggesting that over half of divorce cases involve at least one partner using pornography.
Wow, that's a pretty significant correlation.
Yeah.
It suggests that frequent pornography use can create this disconnect between partners,
Right.
fostering dissatisfaction and resentment that can ultimately erode the foundation of the relationship.
Yeah. It makes you wonder if those couples were having open and honest conversations about their pornography use.
Right.
And its impact on their relationship. Perhaps if those conversations were happening more often, we'd have fewer relationships falling apart.
Yeah, it definitely raises the question of how we can promote healthier communication and understanding around these issues.
Right.
Because if we're not talking about it, the problems are only going to fester.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on from relationships, he also delves into the psychological and emotional toll that pornography addiction can take. And he lists a whole range of issues, including depression, anxiety, social isolation, low self-esteem.
Yeah, and what's often overlooked is the shame and guilt that accompany addiction, you know? It becomes this vicious cycle where those negative emotions fuel the addictive behavior, which in turn fuels more negative emotions. It's a tough cycle to break.
And he actually shared a story about a young man who, after recovering from pornography addiction, realized he had been operating at only a fraction of his potential.
Wow.
And it really highlights how deeply this addiction can impact mental clarity, focus, and overall well-being.
That anecdote is so powerful because it speaks to the potential we unlock when we break free from these harmful patterns. It's like this whole world opens up.
Yeah. So, okay, buckle up because this next one is especially striking.
Okay.
He cites research indicating a dramatic increase in erectile dysfunction among young men.
Wow.
Which seems to coincide with the rise of high-speed internet and easier access to pornography.
Yeah, that's definitely a correlation worth exploring further.
Right.
You know, while we can't say for certain that one caused the other,
Right.
it does raise some serious questions about the physiological effects of frequent pornography use.
He attributes it to the brain's reward system becoming desensitized over time.
Right.
It's as if the brain needs increasingly intense stimulation to achieve the same level of satisfaction. And this can lead to problems in real-life sexual encounters.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that brings us to the really crucial topic of recovery.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes that, breaking free from pornography, addiction is a journey. That demands patience, self-awareness, and a genuine commitment to change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he really highlights the importance of acknowledging the problem as the first step.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the addictive nature of pornography and how it's impacting your life in negative ways.
It's about owning the issue rather than trying to sweep it under the rug.
Right.
Because let's face it, most people struggling with this addiction are suffering in silence.
Right.
Often feeling too ashamed or embarrassed to seek help.
And he's a big proponent of seeking support, whether it's through therapy, support groups, or even just confiding in a trusted friend or family member.
Yeah, that sense of community and accountability can be incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
It helps people realize they're not alone in this fight.
Right.
And that recovery is possible.
He also stressed the importance of cultivating healthy habits that promote overall well-being.
Yes.
Things like exercise, spending time in nature, pursuing hobbies you enjoy. Nurturing meaningful relationships can all play a role in the recovery process.
Absolutely. It's about creating this fulfilling life that doesn't revolve around pornography.
Right.
When you're filling your days with positive experiences and connections, that urge to escape into that virtual world just becomes less powerful.
And he specifically mentioned an organization called WA3I that offers support groups, online resources, and even retreats for people seeking recovery from pornography addiction.
That's fantastic.
Cool.
It's encouraging to see organizations specifically dedicated to addressing this issue and providing that practical support for those who need it most.
Now, one thing that really struck me about his approach is that he doesn't frame pornography addiction solely as a moral failing.
Right.
He recognizes the complexities of this issue.
Yeah.
And acknowledges that it's often rooted in deeper emotional or psychological needs that aren't being met.
Yeah, that's such an important distinction because when we reduce it to just a simple matter of morality, we fail to understand those underlying mechanisms driving the addictive behavior. And that makes it much harder to find those lasting solutions.
It's like saying, someone with a substance abuse problem simply lacks willpower.
Exactly.
It's a much more nuanced issue than that.
Yeah.
And it requires a more nuanced approach to treatment and recovery.
He's essentially saying that we need to treat pornography addiction with the same seriousness and compassion that we would any other addiction, right?
Right.
It's a public health issue that deserves our attention and our resources.
Absolutely. So let's dig a little deeper into this.
Okay.
And how this addiction can manifest differently in men and women.
Yeah.
He notes that while the issue is often portrayed as primarily affecting men,
Right.
women are increasingly struggling with pornography addiction as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that societal expectations and pressures can play a huge role here. Women may face those unique challenges due to that double standard surrounding female sexuality.
Right. Making them even more reluctant to seek help or admit they have a problem.
And it's not just about the stigma, it's also about the type of content that they're exposed to.
Yeah,
he points out that the kind of pornography women are more likely to encounter
right.
often reinforces those unrealistic beauty standards and objectification, which can lead to body image issues and low self-esteem.
It's a reminder that pornography isn't this monolithic entity, right? There are different genres and subgenres that cater to different desires and fantasies.
Right.
And some of those genres can be particularly damaging to women's self-perception and mental health.
And he stresses the need for more research and awareness, specifically focused on the experiences of women struggling with pornography addiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is crucial.
It's about recognizing that this isn't just a men's issue, right?
Right.
Women need a seat at the table when we're talking about prevention, treatment, and recovery.
Another interesting point he raises is the link between pornography addiction and social isolation.
He suggests that pornography can create this vicious cycle where individuals withdraw from real-life relationships and social interactions, finding solace and connection only in that virtual world.
And that's such a critical observation because it's as if pornography becomes a substitute for real human connection.
Right.
But it's a poor substitute at best. It can offer that temporary relief from loneliness or boredom.
Right.
But it ultimately prevents people from forming those meaningful bonds and experiencing the joys of genuine intimacy.
And that isolation can, in turn, make the addiction even worse.
Totally.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
The more isolated you become, the more you rely on pornography to cope.
Yeah.
Which leads to even greater isolation.
It underscores the importance of breaking that cycle by actively seeking out activities that foster genuine connection.
Right.
Whether it's joining a club, volunteering in your community, or simply making an effort to spend more time with loved ones. Cultivating real-life relationships can be such a powerful antidote to the isolation that often accompanies addiction.
And this kind of dovetails nicely into his discussion about the impact of pornography on our understanding of intimacy and relationships.
Yeah.
He argues that the distorted representations of sex and relationships found in pornography can negatively influence how we perceive and approach intimacy in real life.
Right. He's basically saying that watching too much pornography can warp our expectations and make it harder to distinguish between fantasy and reality.
Yeah.
It can lead to unrealistic ideals about partners, performance, and what constitutes a good sexual experience.
He points out that pornography often portrays these unrealistic scenarios and expectations, leading to misunderstandings and dissatisfaction in real-life relationships.
Yeah, it's like trying to apply the rules of a video game to the complexities of human interaction, right?
Right.
It just doesn't work.
So he's advocating for a more balanced and informed approach to understanding sexuality and relationships. One that recognizes the importance of communication, empathy, and mutual respect.
He really emphasizes the importance of educating ourselves about healthy sexuality and relationships from credible sources that provide accurate and realistic information.
Right. It's about moving away from that scripted and often exploitative world of pornography.
Exactly.
And embracing the complexities and nuances of genuine human connection.
Totally.
And communication's another key theme he touches upon.
Yeah.
He encourages couples to have these open and honest conversations about their needs, desires, and boundaries.
Yeah.
Creating a space for mutual respect and understanding.
Yeah. This open communication can help prevent so many misunderstandings and address those potential issues before they escalate into major conflicts.
Right.
It's about creating that partnership where both individuals feel safe and comfortable expressing themselves,
right,
and working together to navigate the challenges that inevitably arise in any relationship.
So this leads into a really fascinating part of the conversation where he delves into this concept of what he calls pornography brain.
Okay.
And its effects on cognitive function and emotional regulation.
He explains that frequent exposure to pornography can actually rewire the brain, right?
Right.
Leading to these changes in neural pathways associated with reward, motivation, and impulse control.
Right. It's like the brain gets so accustomed to that quick hit of dopamine associated with watching pornography that it becomes less responsive to other forms of pleasure or stimulation.